My project is largely based on thought and the things that affect that. So I wanted to include a clip that was the main inspiration for my thinking about thought.
Guy
Hello?
Hello, is this Dr. Fernyhough?
Hi, can you hear me now?
named Charles Fernyhough,
I'm a writer and developmental psychologist from Durham University.
and we were having this conversation with him about what happens to young kids when they learn words.
Orange juice, apple, J, thinking.
Like that, like what happens to the way they see the world. And in the middle of the chat, he said something kind of radical, which was that before they have words,
I don't think very young children do think.
like think, period? Was there a period at the end of that sentence? You don't think that they think, period?
I don't think they think in the way that I want to call thinking, all right, which is a bit of a cheat, but let me say...
What he meant
by
is
thinking.
that thinking, as he defines it, is basically just words sounding silently in your head. And before you have those words in your head, you can't think. Now, this is a controversial idea which we debated back and forth, but for the next few minutes, we're not going to debate it. We're going to jump into it farther. Because whether or not you think it's true, if you follow the idea all the way through, as we're about to do, it does lead you to some interesting places. So, first of all, this whole idea, says Charles, goes back to this Russian guy
Russian psychologist.
named
Vygotsky.
Lev Vygotsky.
Vygotsky.
And is he a contemporary dude?
No, he died in the 30s. He was active in
Anyhow, he
the 20s
came
and
up with
30s.
this idea. It's a really interesting notion of how kids learn to think. And it all begins, he said, on the outside.
Think about a small child who's sitting down solving a puzzle.
Marco, does that look like it goes somewhere?
It goes here.
You're sitting down and you're working together on a puzzle, and all you've got to do is get these shapes into this board in the right kind of order. If you watch any kid with their parent anywhere in the world doing this kind of thing, you'll see them thinking together.
No, that doesn't have an edge.
The child, for example, picks up a picture of a boat and says, where am I going to put this boat piece? And then the mum says, well, have a look at the shape.
Stella.
And then the kid looks at the shape and says, oh, it's got that pointy bit there. And the mum says, right, well, can you see anywhere on the board that has a pointy bit?
Right there.
And so on.
According to Vygotsky, this is the beginning of thinking, this kind of dialogue. And at this point,
It's completely external.
it's all happening in that space between the child and her mother.
Try putting that
That
together. We don't know where it
matches.
goes yet, but if you put it together.
And only over time does it become internalized.
And how that happens, Vygotsky thought, is that as the child gets older, she'll start to take on the dialogue herself. She'll start to talk to herself.
This is the stage we call private speech.
We've all seen kids do this, right? Where they narrate every single thing they're doing. Put the ball in the box. Take the ball out of the box.
Now, what then happens is a few years further down the line,
These kids who are narrating everything they're doing then go to school, and the teachers tell them, shh, don't talk out loud.
so they kind of get the message that they need to start doing this internally.
So they start to whisper to themselves out loud, and then eventually they whisper to themselves silently.
So, with Charles Fernyhough's definition of thought, I was really intrigued, and I guess I had never really thought about how it works. I just knew that I thought inside my head when I read and when I was thinking out a math problem maybe. And then I started to think about people who don't really have a voice, people who are deaf, maybe even people who are mute, but people who'd never heard anything at all, don't know what anything, much less the own sound of their voice, sounds like. How would that work for them? Do they sign inside their head? Do they see words? I was just confused on how that might work and interested in finding out how it did. So then, my project was really large, thinking about how the thought process was affected by possibly language. So it turned into a new direction when I came across the idea of deaf architecture, which is just architecture made by the deaf. Deaf architecture was defined as an emphasis on natural light, the permeability between inside and outside spaces, free-flowing curvilinear movement, transparency and openness enable the deaf to depend on visual cues where one would normally depend on sound. Deaf architecture is based on 5 main principles: space, light, composition, form, and materiality. Space addresses the desired qualities of the place we inhabit. It is marked by a spatial condition of openness and a smooth flow of space from public to private. This provides visual access, which is necessary to understand and navigate a building. This is an example of what you would see as space in a deaf architecture setting. Light addresses the natural condition we desire that enables our eyes to see the place we inhabit. Natural, even lighting is optimal in order for people to easily see sign language. So, backlighting, glares, and shadows make it very difficult for people using sign language as communication. Here's another image. This is an image of even lighting. That would be helpful for them. Composition identifies the broad concepts that ultimately form light and space. Key destination points should be easily viewed from a central public area to help eliminate confusion. Here's an image of that. Then form addresses the physical elements that build up from the plan concept and enclosed space. In public areas of the building, stairs and balconies should be included. This then provides a variety of opportunities for them to both see others and be seen by others. This is a really great example of that. Materiality addresses the qualities of form that include the place we inhabit. The color palette should account for varying skin tones. This too, like lighting, provides a contrasting background to better see sign language. What does this all mean in relation to thought? Now, it's obvious from all of the things I've just described that the deaf really rely more on their sense of hearing. And in an article I read in the New York Times, which was my main inspiration with deaf architecture, it said that the deaf in a very enclosed space feel vulnerable because they can't see people that are coming at them from different angles. So if they're relying so much on their sense of sight, it would make sense that their thought process isn't as based on hearing and voice as ours is, as they depend so much on their other senses like sight and touch and things like that. That just makes so much more sense. Thinking about deaf architecture really kind of makes the obvious stand out. I think this really points to some further research that could be done looking at how thoughts in deaf people and deaf architecture are related. So I think that really opens up an idea and a concrete example of how their thought process would be completely different from the thought process of a hearing person.